Okay, welcome back to our live stream, Ask Me Anything with We the Governed. My name's Glen Morgan. If you haven't been on one of these before, this is actually the first one that we've had since the 2024 Republican convention. And that's what happened over the weekend. And so this is our first one back from there, and I'm sure that that'll be probably a prime topic of a lot of the questions that people want to ask today. But basically, just want a reminder, if you're going to ask any questions, if you could just say the @WeTheGoverned and put it down below, it just makes it a little bit easier for me to be able to actually see your question, because sometimes there's a lot of comments that start popping up, and then it's hard for me to keep track and find your question while I'm trying to answer it. So when I'm attempting to answer your question, I will try to post it so that you can see what question it is that I'm trying to answer at that time. So and it's just since I literally just got back from the convention, there's my delegate pass from the weekend. I've got a couple of things to discuss here. I did produce a video earlier today that I hope will go out tomorrow, just on kind of my summary and kind of a breakdown of some of the convention results and other things that I observed while I was there. Some of that might duplicate what you're going to ask me today and some of the questions that we have, or at least my attempt to answer some of your questions. But that's the main topic for the primary video that I'm launching in the next couple days. We are trying a slightly different layout here at the studio, so just let me know what you think, and if you like it or you don't, just let me know. Again, I'm going to start with a couple things that I have promised to do in the past, and sometimes I don't follow through on it really well. But this week, Thursday evening, I'm going to be at the Evergreen Women's Republican Club, which is going to be held Thursday at 6 to 8:30 p.m. roughly at the Sean O'Donnell's Irish Pub and Restaurant up on, it's in Everett, so it's just right off the freeway there. If you don't know where that is, you can Google Sean O'Donnell's and you can't miss it. It really is an easy access off of I-5. And so I look forward to seeing you. If you happen to be in the Everett area, you don't have to be a member of the Evergreen Women's Republican Club to be there. I've gone to, this is one of my, I love going to this event with this group, and I'll be speaking there. I am not sure of my topic yet. I still am working on that a little bit, but I'm sure it'll be covering activism and some of the issues that are going on around the state. This Saturday, I expect in the evening, I'm not going to be, I actually had a conflict pop up between the Thurston County Republican Lincoln Day dinner and a re-election kickoff that I promised that I'd be at for Amy Kruver, who's in Pierce County, and it's going to be on the Pierce County Council. And that's going to be out in Eatonville from 4 to 6:30 p.m. or so on Thursday, so I plan to be there. And anyway, so I will, those are a couple of events. There's some more coming up after that, but that's what I have going on just this next week. And that was something that I promised to try to update my regular viewers if there's something going on. There's also a couple things. I just keep meaning to bring this up, and I just want to reference this. I've got a couple of handouts here that I picked up over the years from the Leadership Institute, and you can kind of see it if you look here, but it's the Morton Blackwell's Laws of the Public Policy Process. I'm pretty sure you can download this from the Leadership Institute's website. I ended up getting a bunch of these handouts when I was back there last time. I had them send them out to me because what I wanted to do is to be able to hand these out to activists when I'm putting on my activist training, because in this little handout here, it's really pretty useful for people, especially if you're new to the political process or you want to get more involved in it. There's 45 different rules. Morton Blackwell, who is a longtime activist in the Republican conservative circles since the 60s, he's getting up there in years now, but I actually brought him to Columbia when I was in college Republican, and he put on a campaign training class. It was really awesome, actually. And I had a chance to meet him again a few weeks ago when I was out in D.C., and obviously, again, he's older now, but it was still kind of fun to see him, 30 some odd years later. He was just still engaged and still involved in the process. I disagree with 17 and 23 a little bit in here, but I definitely think that these are basically some really good principles to live by. I'm going to mention in here that there's a couple of these that are just classic. Like number 1, never give a bureaucrat a chance to say no, right? In number 38, in politics, nothing moves unless pushed, right? Number 45, pray as if it all depended on God and work as if it all depended on you. Sometimes I wish more people would do that. Let's see. Number 40, one big reason is better than many little reasons. So anyway, number 32, a prompt, generous letter of thanks conceal a commitment which otherwise might disappear when the going gets rough. So anyway, there's just some really good statements in here and good little rules to live by. We all break some of them at times, but they're good reminders to those of us who try to want to make a bigger impact anyway by showing up. The other one that they have, that this is more recent, but I love it, and this is just a quick handout. Looks like this. Again, this is something I'm sure you can download from the Leadership Institute's website. If you come to my training seminars, I'm going to hand out these as long as I still have inventory. And this one's the 10 worst mistakes of losing candidates and winning candidates. And I'll give you, I'll basically give you a couple examples here. Losing candidates. Number 4, hiring consultants who personally absorb too much of their campaign budgets. Winning candidates. Number 2, not keeping campaign promises. These days, voters have little tolerance for incumbents who break their word. And number 7, getting greedy for money or higher offices. So anyway, these are just a list of the 10 mistakes made, 10 worst mistakes of losing candidates and winning candidates. And I think that these are really, really handy, especially if you want to get involved in the political process. I would make it mandatory reading for everybody before they run for office, and for most people before they go out and volunteer. I think they're pretty helpful. Anyway, I noticed that some of you are starting to post up some questions here. I'll get to those in a few minutes. I do want to just talk a little bit about the convention this weekend. Now, I did when I did a video here earlier, I did make a couple of recommendations to. I kind of closed out some recommendations of just things to make it better. For those of you, by the way, who were there and were frustrated with the long security lines, which I was, and I thought it kind of surprised me that they had these long security lines with metal detectors and security people really checking and controlling access to the venue. It turned out that the reason why that was done, it was not because of the Washington State Republican Party, it was because the convention itself, the convention center itself, had threats. Excuse me. Had threats that came from Antifa, apparently. And they threatened to come and, damage the venue or attack people or whatever it is they do. I mean, leftists are always violent, and threats of violence come to them as common as rain in the Pacific Northwest. And so, of course, they'd called in threats to the convention, it's like they always do. And the convention was freaked out by it. And so they were the ones that mandated those security lines that you had to go through if you were at the convention. So it was frustrating because it did definitely push back the ability of people to get in easily, much quicker than, and because of that also, it made it awkward if you wanted to leave and say walk down the street a little ways to get something to eat and come back. You had to fight through this line again to get back into the convention. But I didn't know until recently it was because Antifa threatened the event, and that's why the convention itself mandated the security lines that everybody had to go through. Another thing I want to point out, and this was just an observation that I make in the video, and it has to do with the fact that there were roughly about 850 or so delegates that 380 just didn't show up. They had registered, paid, didn't show up, and about another 400, give or take. So basically could have attended the convention. It's a little more than 400, but there were literally blank empty slots where they didn't show up. So that's a decent number of people that could have been added to the attendance at this convention. Now, as it was, there were about 1,830 attendees. So there were about 2,000 plus people in there because you had guests and you had press and a lot of other people kind of hanging around there. But there were a pretty large group of people there, but it would have been larger if more of the people had wanted to show up and make an impact, and they could have. They would have been legally allowed. 2,500 delegates is actually what the convention was designed to hold, and what the Republican Party in the state of Washington, the way they have it structured, that's how many they can come and have. So to miss out on that many delegates that could have otherwise been there, it was interesting, and I do address that a little bit in my video that I'll be launching later on today. So let's get into some of the basically some of the questions that people are asking. By the way, thank you for everybody that came up and said hi. I do appreciate that, and I'm glad that I had a chance to meet you. There were, several. I'd say I probably had a chance to chat with at least about 100, 150 people personally, maybe a little bit more, just depending on what was going on at the convention and where we were standing. I was trying to take some photos here and there and take notes on a couple things so I wouldn't forget some of what I was observing at the convention so that I could report on it later or talk about it later on. But I always appreciate when people are coming up and wanted to talk to me, and so I try to engage as much as possible. So don't ever feel like you're intimidated or something. I don't know why you would be, but feel free to approach me, and I'll see you in person. I like seeing people out in the public, and I do get approached fairly frequently by people who watch the show. One thing I'm going to mention, though, one of the most common things people tell me is that in person I look taller than they thought I was on the video. I don't know why videos make you look shorter. I don't know why that's the case, but that is like the most common. Apparently more people think that than say it, but it's one of the more common things people tell me when they meet me in person is that, oh, you're taller than I thought you'd be. So for whatever reason, when we're doing this video or when you're seeing me on video, it makes me look shorter. I'm sitting down right now, but for some reason it still makes me look shorter, which I thought was funny. And it's a common thing that people will say. So, I did link this, put this link in down below because there was a video I wanted to do today that I couldn't get. I just didn't have time to get it recorded. And it was trying to catch up on all the politicians and PACs and lefty groups that I've caught breaking the law that have been sanctioned just in the last couple months, say. There's quite a few of them. I do have them on my website. If you go to the link down below, and I think that works for people if you want to, you don't have to link to it now, but it'll be in the comments section, or you just go to my website at wethegovern.com and just go up in the About Glen section, and there's a direct link, or you can link to it from the front homepage, and it just details everything, all of the original source documents, the complaints, the fines, the actual statements of understanding, the settlements, the lawsuits, everything. And there's hundreds of them there, of politicians that I've caught breaking the law in the last few years. And I just try to keep it documented just so there's a record and an easy place to go find it, so that if people ever wonder if I'm actually catching people breaking the law, and the answer is yes, it's hundreds of them, I've documented it there. It's just a common place to go to. And this came up again at the convention. People were asking me about this, and I just thought I'd mention it again because it's on my website, not really on my YouTube channel. I do have it linked oftentimes in the video description down below, but in case you want it, it's kind of a boring page, but it provides all the source links, and it kind of details everybody, and the amount of the fine or the forfeit or the lawsuit or whatever it is. It's all there, so it's fairly helpful. Let's get into some of the questions that you guys have. First question here from Shannon Daniel. When will petitions start being circulated for the natural gas ban? I missed you at the convention. You were busy talking to folks. Well, Shannon, I'm sorry. I wish that you'd come up and said hi anyway, even if I was talking to people. That's fine. I don't have an answer to that question because I think there's some debate. First of all, there's not an official title that's been approved yet by the AG's office. A number of different versions were put into the hopper, but I'm not sure that one of them has come out completely with an approved title. So you can't actually go out and collect signatures until the title's been approved. Now, the deadline on this is July, so I think it's pretty tight. to get there, to achieve that deadline. So I'm not sure. It's a short time to collect a lot of signatures, so we'll see what happens. Now, they could always do it differently and do another initiative to the legislature, which they would have more time to do. But anyway, we'll see what happens. And at this point in time, they're not going to be circulated just yet because they don't have that final title done. So that was a good question, though. Thank you for asking. Alex Brown, good evening, Glenn. I'm sure you heard about the protests and arrests at Columbia University. What are your thoughts on all that? To me, it seems like some overreaching First Amendment violations. Okay, so, and this is a funny question because obviously I went to Columbia University myself, and there were a couple of times the police came when I was there because protests and even aggressive and sometimes nasty protests were fairly common when I went to school there, just like they are now. And the police usually won't come and get involved at Columbia unless either they're assaulting people, they're blocking traffic on Broadway or Amsterdam, which they've done historically in the past. Eventually, the NYPD frowns upon that. And Manhattan has a lot of traffic, and so it really does cause problems when you go out and sit down in traffic or decide to have a riot out into the traffic, which they've done in the past when I was there, or when they take over a building, for example. Now, Columbia University actually has a long history of pretty aggressive protests, often for dubious reasons, but they'll have protests nonetheless. Back in the 60s, they became famous in the country, and they really destroyed the university for quite a while by taking over buildings for lengthy periods of time, kind of occupying the buildings, preventing students from having any access to the libraries or to their classrooms or the professors, just really disrupting and kind of living in those living in the buildings like a dorm room. I remember once when I was there, they were going to take over a building, the key building, Hamilton Hall, which is where a ton of students were going to have finals, and of course they did it right in the middle of final week, and they were going to deny access for most of these students to go in and take their finals, which is it genuinely is obnoxious and frustrating. And I had enough time because I had placed people inside the leftist groups on campus, so I knew it was coming. And so I remember we went in and removed all the toilet paper from the building ahead of time because we figured that leftists usually won't fight the man or fight the power too long without toilet paper. And I know that sounds funny, but most of these are really rich kids from super wealthy families. They're trust fund kids. You didn't find the work study kids or like me, people who were there on financial aid programs. They usually aren't the kids in there doing those more aggressive and nasty protests. And so I remember they called out the police when they took over the building after about 12 hours, just because they wanted to clear the building. And the protesters had gotten violent a couple times and assaulted a few people. And so the police came out, and then the protesters, probably not enjoying the fact they had no toilet paper, ran away in the end. Similar to a couple times when the police came out and they had blocked Broadway. What you're seeing right now is kind of similar at Columbia. And remember, there's a certain point. I mean, they don't care at Columbia. They're not going to care about you out there protesting. My freshman year, I remember I had to fight my way through protests. When I was at Columbia, every single day that I had a class, there was always some protest about something. At a certain point in time, it just becomes part of the background. You don't pay attention. It's the same students usually over and over again, protesting fur, protesting Haitian AIDS refugees, protesting the collapse of socialism, protesting whatever it is they were told to protest. It's a lot of mindless kind of protesting that goes on a lot, and it's usually the same students over and over again. So just because those students are getting arrested doesn't mean that's that's a First Amendment violation. Usually it just means the protest has taken a much more aggressive direction, and you're starting to make it impossible for the other students to go to class. There's a huge quad there. You can protest anything and everything you want all the time, especially up in front of the library by the alma mater, up on the steps right there. There's plenty of room, and you can set up speakers, and you can drone on to your heart's content. They've been doing that for decades, half a century. So I really don't think there's anything particularly restrictive at the school in regards to protests. Usually they don't start calling in the police, though, until you've either assaulted people, or you're just making it impossible for them to just conduct school. The kids that aren't rich, that are the ones who are not usually involved in the protests, eventually really do want to get a degree at some point in time, and they don't have their parents' trust fund to rely on to pay for another ridiculous and absurd cost of schooling. And so they do want to go to class, they do want to get through school, and so eventually it's just too obnoxious, and that's what they have to do. So it's hardly, I don't think this is really a good example of a First Amendment violation, particularly since that school's usually tends to err on the others. I mean, they go overboard on it. The one thing they, like most of the colleges, Columbia's had the problem with the heckler's veto, right? Which is where leftists feel entitled enough to violate everybody else's First Amendment rights by trying to silence anybody who they disagree with when they come on campus. They tried this a couple times on a few of the events that I remember organizing on campus, but I think they're worse now, even although I thought they were pretty bad back then, but they're probably worse now, and they're more willing to be violent now than they used to be, I think. When I brought Rudy Giuliani to campus before he ran for mayor, and when I brought Dinesh D'Souza in to campus, early days, this is back before he was as well known, he had just written illiberal education and brought him on campus. And so, they're trying to shut that down. And so I remember there was a lot going on at the time, and they sometimes we'd have security there, but I don't remember ever needing to shut down an event just because we had some hecklers in the audience. Usually they would, they'd stand up and get their attention they wanted and left. Now, I don't know, with the age of social media now today, it may actually be a little, and with Antifa and some of this other stuff that's happened in the last few years, I think that's kind of changed the dynamics of bringing in alternative speakers. I think the left is pretty open to the fact that they no longer support First Amendment at all. They don't care about free speech at all, and in fact, they only believe that the only speech that needs to be protected is theirs, and yours and mine get silenced. And so I think that's kind of some of the issues here. Corey, thanks for pointing out. Yep, enjoyed seeing you at the convention as well. It was a historic first for our state, and of course, it wasn't perfect the first time. It never is, but it as an endorsement or as an endorsing convention. It was the first time that we've ever done that in our state, especially before filing week. And so this is kind of a big deal. We will not know if the party's going to do this more in the future until they probably just sit back, and they're going to have to answer that question. Do they want to continue to do conventions this way? And I think what's going to influence their decision on that is going to be what happens in August and what happens in November. Kind of stealing thunder here for my later video, but I'm anticipating that's kind of where then they'll make that decision as to, hey, was this effective? Did we actually get Republicans through the primary, so they didn't flood the zone and cancel each other out, or were we not able to achieve that goal, or whatever? So we'll see. Shannon, this is a good point. The attendance for the convention was still the highest in history. And that's interesting because I believe that's true. Several people have mentioned that. I want to go back and double check that because I'm not 100% sure that that's true. But if it is the highest in attendance that they've had, that's a good thing. I still want to point out, though, that they could have had about another 840 or so people who, either the 400 some odd counties that didn't even fill their slate, or the 380 who signed up and then paid for it and didn't go. Maybe something came up, right? That can happen. But anyway, that's what's going on. Shannon, you had another question here. What is going on with the lawsuit against Cody Hart? And I don't know, actually. I'm aware there is a lawsuit. I'm not even sure what it's about at this point in time. There's a lot of people out here doing things around the state. I don't necessarily track everybody's litigation. I'm usually involved in enough litigation myself at any given time, either prepping for it or in it, that I don't oftentimes necessarily pay attention to other people's litigation as much. I've tracked Tim Iman's case quite a bit just because of the significance I felt that represented. And obviously I filed an amicus brief in his case too, which I wrote about, and I think I did a video on as well. But I don't know specifically what's actually going on in Cody Hart's case, so I'm sorry I cannot answer that right now. But if I get a chance to look at it, I will I'll take a look at those. Patrick Foley. Glenn, what recourse do we, the people, have when the elected servants just ignore their oath of office? Well, that's a great question. I mean, one recourse you have would just be to simply vote in somebody different. I mean, that's the easiest and most efficient recourse. The one thing I have to tell people, though, is that you don't just flip a politician out of office overnight. It really does take some planning. And I know that's stunning to people, but you really do want to plan ahead of time. And that means you'd want to go out and recruit. You want to identify people who are viable candidates, who are going to run serious campaigns, who know how to fundraise, who know how to plan, who actually know what they're doing, who know what the job entails. Get them started early. If you start early, you really increase the odds in your favor, provided you're still a serious candidate and you can do all these other things. And I would also put a lot more attention on those politicians that are violating their oath of office. Depends on what they're doing, but try to focus on the violations. Clarity for the violations are important. It is simple and lazy to say they're violating their oath of office, but what exactly are they doing that are violating their oath of office? And you do have to be, I think, specific about that. A lot of people aren't, and what happens is it adds to the confusion because corruption is so common, incompetence is even more common. Again, my definition of government, right? It's a mountain of corruption concealed by an ocean of incompetence. It's your best definition of government you'll ever get, and the most accurate that I've ever been able to find, at least a modern government. However, you have to come up with rational and legal plans. Just because you're angry about it and you get a handful of other people that are angry about it, that your anger isn't going to automatically change the outcome. You have to presume the fact that vast majority of people in your community have no idea what's going on. When I say vast majority, I'm talking 98.5% of the population. And the only way they're going to know what's going on is if you find a way to communicate to them, because the traditional media usually just ignores most problems, especially if they're left-leaning candidates. The media is not going to report on what's actually going on. There's just no scenario where they will. You could hand the media a corruption story about a Democrat on a silver platter, laid out with all the source documents you want, and 9 times out of 10, they'll never cover that story. They'll bury it. So if you want to communicate to your community, you have to come up with a process and a plan to actually go out and do that. So that's one, communicating to the people. Number 2, get somebody to replace that bad politician. And it takes serious people. We oftentimes have people who mean well, but they jump into running for office without much in the way of preparation, planning, forethought, strategy, tactics, anything, actually. And it's okay if you've had a vision from God and he's told you to run, but it doesn't mean he's told you you're going to win. It's a little bit easier if you get together and actually come up with a practical, realistic approach to how you're going to run for office and actually prevail there. It's easier to be a little bit more impulsive maybe for a school board race, but you're not going to jump in out of the blue generally and run for the federal Senate seat statewide, raising no money and being very unserious. You're just not going to go anywhere with it. I don't know why people think that it's easy for them to do that and succeed in that process. And it's interesting because Republicans and conservatives generally tend to be more entrepreneurial folk. They've oftentimes, we've tended to start businesses or been involved in starting companies. And most of us, if we're going to go down that road, we'll do a little bit of research, market research, study what the process is. Even if it's just a simple little latte stand, you're going to spend some time trying to make sure there's enough traffic flow, try to calculate out what your cost of goods are going to be, what's the process I have to go through for permitting, things like that. You'll spend a bunch of time on that. And the same exact people that would do that will spend almost no time deciding that they suddenly are going to run for office as though everything's going to magically fall in your lap and just happen overnight because you want it to. It's kind of a Mr. Smith Goes to Washington attitude about the Sunday afternoon 2-hour special solution to all the world's political problems. It's not quite like that. And just because there's idiots in government and they're exceptionally stupid people or corrupt or dishonest, it doesn't mean it's that easy to necessarily remove them. Being smarter than they are, more capable than they are by itself doesn't mean that you're going to win. That's not typically how it works. You have to really put a lot of pieces together to run an efficient campaign. Again, harder at the state level, right? and then the congressional level and the legislative level and the city county commission level and the city councilman and the school board. School board's kind of your entry level sort of position there, but it just takes a lot of work to win an election, and that's the best thing you can do if you want to replace that person who's violating the oath of office. Jason, here's a comment about hope you're doing well. Can Joe Kent win his House district? This current representative is a total joke. Marie Glusenkamp Perez, I think is her name, is the current congresswoman in the 3rd Congressional District. She is a Democrat. That's where I live. I'm in the very north end of the 3rd Congressional District. And at least in this particular race right now, there are 2 Republicans running, but I think, to be fair, Joe Kent is probably quite a ways out ahead in fundraising and endorsements and volunteers and all that stuff. I'm actually, he was at the Lewis County Republicans when I was the MC earlier, and we auctioned off a shooting event together. We'll both be shooting. I think it's coming up in May. Anyway, it was that was one of the things we had auctioned off while we were there, and I get the sense that he's got a lot of momentum behind him. Now there is another candidate running against him, but I think in the primary at this point in time, he's probably the primary lead that's going to go against Glusenkamp in this November, and we'll see. It seems that district is kind of a plus Republican 5, give or take. I always think they kind of undercount the actual Republican vote in that district, so we will see. But it looks pretty reasonable to me anyway, that he's got a pretty good shot. And I have had some interaction with the current congresswoman, mostly because my daughter applied to military academies, and so she went through the approval process, this committee process where they interview you, and my daughter got the nomination from Glusenkamp. I'm sure that Glusenkamp had no idea that I'm her father, but nevertheless, it's that's about, how often do you really interact with your congressperson, but that was my experience so far. But I am, I'm going to be voting. I'm assuming Joe Kent gets it through the primary. I'll be voting for him in the general. So, TZ Burton. Hi, Glenn. Like the fiery GOP convention. It's about time Republicans get some fire in their bellies. Well, to be fair, that isn't unusual. 80% of the people or so, I think who attended this convention, this is your first convention. And I'm not somebody who's been going to them for decades. But I have gone to a few before in the past, and I've talked to a lot of people who've been at even more. And if you were there during the Ron Paul days, the conventions were pretty contentious. A lot was going on. If you were there in 2016 in Pasco, and you remember some of the floor fights that were going on in regards to Trump versus basically, I think by that time it was just Trump versus everybody, but because all the other candidates essentially dropped out, so Trump was only one. But there was still a bunch of fighting, a bunch of never Trump stuff was going on the floor. I remember that. There's always some kind of drama. I don't know why people seem to forget that. Maybe it's just the kind of thing where if it hasn't happened lately, then you just don't remember. But it's not unusual to have a little bit of extra stuff going on in a convention. 2020 was an online convention, which is kind of useless, I think. It was during COVID, and it really wasn't. It really wasn't. It didn't have the same kind of drama because you're just not there in person. And so one of the things to remember is that the people attending that convention, to observe it, because it's their first time, they're shocked that people are yelling from the floor, or that they stand up and turn their back on a speaker, which is not typical, but that kind of stuff's going on, that there's motions from the floor, and there's the chair's having to rule on these motions, and there's some Robert Rules of Order, and then there's public comment, and then you get people who come up and just want to talk to hear themselves talk, and then there's, so there's all this kind of stuff that goes on. It's just what happens. So let me see. Let's see. Ferguson really went after Semibird for his 1993 financial crime, and Republicans in general. Any way to compile a list of all the financial crimes Ferguson has committed and publish it? Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's probably less about it's more just documenting the corruption and incompetence that he's displayed for so long. And I am interested in doing that myself, and I'll probably be involved in that somewhat. But anybody that has their own lists, I don't think there's any reason to hold back. Keep sharing it and seeing where it goes. Jason, what's your thoughts on the I'm assuming you mean prosecutor in Trump's trial coming from the Attorney General's office? Is this common downgrading to a city prosecutor? I think you mean prosecutor there. So well, it kind of depends which prosecutor we're talking about. So the Georgia prosecutor obviously was just an egregious train wreck of ethical violations at a pretty extreme level. I mean, normally that's enough to get you disbarred. Because she's doing what the left wants her to do, then I imagine that she'll get away with it to some extent. But normally, that's pretty extreme, to be honest with you, with what she did. Now, you got the prosecutor at the federal level in the documents case with those recent documents that have come out through FOIA because he was trying to conceal the fact that he'd colluded ahead of time with the Department of Justice and the Biden administration to set up Trump for this type of violation going all the way back to January, I think, of the 2021. That's another level of issue with prosecutors doing bad things and just doing dishonest and corrupt things. And then, of course, you also have the prosecutor in New York, which was just another level of incompetence, judging from the way that ruling's kind of gone on a couple of these cases. But again, these are prosecutors who have come out and openly admitted that this is political persecution that they're pursuing in order to prevent this guy, Trump, from being on the ballot and to get him from being on the ballot. And anyway, so I think that there's, we're going to have corrupt people in government, unfortunately. And they may, at this point in time, the focus, of course, is on these guys, but they're hardly alone. It does mean you need to pay a lot of attention to exactly who gets into these positions. I'd be paying a lot more attention to your local prosecutors quite a bit. Why does a tyrant lead the way and get away with it? People let them. And a lot of times people don't understand how bad government is actually affecting them personally. I do think that's a little bit of it too. Gutless behavior. University president came down hard on unlawful protesters. I would imagine them getting thumbs up from general public run for statewide office. I don't know. I mean, I do think, you'd have to be there at these protests to understand what they're like. And I've been at some in the past in New York City. When I was a college Republican back in the day, I remember I hadn't ever protested. This is in the early 90s, and I hadn't been to big protests before, ever, actually. So I'd heard there was this protest downtown against President Bush at the time, but it was really an anti-war, anti-troops protest. And back then, there was this window of time in the early part of the Persian Gulf War where the left was just coming, they were just having, they were ecstatic over the opportunity to kind of relive the glory days of the 1960s for most of them. But they wanted to come out and attack the military, and they were really openly attacking the soldiers and the troops more than anything else at the time. They changed that narrative later on, but initially that's how they were doing it. And I went down to one of these protests to counter demonstrate. I'd never done that before. And I think we first went to the Iraqi embassy, which is tied into the United Nations, and we had kind of a small protest outside just about all the people that they had killed in Kuwait. And then, the classic kind of, I'd never done these before, but, it was kind of like, it was a fairly simple protest, nothing exciting, but we had a bunch of American flags, probably about 50 of us. So we marched down, because it was only a few blocks away, and we thought, well, let's just go march down to this other big protest, and we'll have a little counter demonstration in the back. And so we get there, and this protest was massive. I mean, there were several thousand people there, at least, outside of this hotel. I think it was on Fifth Avenue at the time. And you get caught up, because it was like going to what I always imagined a Nazi rally would look like, because they were burning American flags in the center. They had these little bonfire going. They were screaming about how America was evil and terrible things were going on. These people were up at this microphone. but the sea of people. And we got up, I remember, on the planters kind of behind him in the middle of the road and started I always think it's kind of a dumb quote or a dumb chant, but we did it anyway. USA, USA, if you ever done that chant. I feel like that's a dumb chant because it's just kind of boring, but nevertheless we did that because you get excited in the moment. Which is fine, except that I remember just seeing the sea of faces turning towards us, right? And they were angry. And coming out of this peace protest, these guys with baseball bats and chains, and I just didn't expect that. And suddenly you have these violent, aggressive people with weapons coming out of this mob at you. Fortunately, we had flags, and so we could kind of hold them off. But it was just full-on contact. The only thing that saved us, actually, was that the New York police were there, and they got between us. They were on horses, and they got horseback right between us and these peace protesters attacking us with chains and baseball bats. And the police were saying, they're going to kill you, back off. And so we backed up, and then the police surrounded us, and they protected us for our little counter-demonstration. The funny thing about it, of course, was we had the same amount of media coverage that day or that evening on television, CNN, BBC, ABC, NBC, that the main big, fancy, huge, giant anti-war protests had. So I learned a little bit of just media there that you could get the same coverage doing far less work just by showing the conflict, right? Because the media likes to cover conflict. That being said, that was the last big protest I ever went to do an open confrontation at, just because it just didn't seem like it was going to pay off with guys coming out with baseball bats and chains. And like I said, the only thing that saved us were the police. What crazy bills will we see if Ferguson wins? Yeah, I mean, that's exactly. You don't want Ferguson in office. I don't, remember Ferguson's going to have, he'll have his hands full regardless, but I would say the governor can propose bills, but essentially the legislature still has to write them and approve them. So Inslee's had bills that he wanted to propose that didn't go anywhere too. So but of course, Ferguson's a little bit nastier and less lazy, so who knows? We'll see about what happens there. Nicola Madenshi, I think. Do you plan to make a video about organization supporting criminal industrial complex? Organization like Pacific Northwest Bail Bonding, also lists of most corrupt judges and prosecutors is what I'm assuming you mean. Well, they can feel like persecutors at times. I don't have a plan right now for that specific type of video. I don't mind doing those types of videos, though. I like doing them. You have to do a lot of research to put it together to make it so that it's understandable and provides some level of clarity on what's actually going on, and it just takes a lot of work to do that research usually. But that's a good suggestion. I like the fact that you put it out there. We'll have to see. Do you mean Northwest Community Bail Fund? I think that's in response to that question earlier. And Brandy Cruz threw shade at the Washington GOP over the convention. Yeah, and I'm sure she's not alone. Listen, anytime you do this, you're always going to have a bunch of people that are critics. Fair enough. Even in my video that I just put up, I had a whole list of things that I would do differently. I mean, and I'll give you an example. And there were a couple things that went unusually well there, actually, that I didn't expect to go well. And I mentioned this in my video, but Juliana McMahon, who I used to work with at the Freedom Foundation, was actually in charge of organizing and the committee for the platform. And she did a phenomenal job here of getting the entire platform approved by the delegate body, and just super professional, went right down, got the whole platform approved. And I think that's actually the first time in many years that they've completed that part of the task, because it's usually left to the end. And usually, by that time, the convention is just dragging out so long, they only get partway through it, and they don't even finish the formal approval and adoption of the platform. And this year they did. And there were lots of amendments that happened, and she just dealt with them. Boom, boom, boom. If you saw her, she was really professional, very good. I think she deserves a call out for that, because it was quite an accomplishment, actually. Now, I'll give I'll be critical about a couple things. One thing was how long it took for them to count the ballots. They had 25 counters there at the convention, and they probably needed about 50 or 60 in order to do it just in a more timely manner. One of the challenges that they had was that because They haven't had an in-person convention since Pasco, so it's been 8 years. I think that you really lose the skill set that you have, or at least the people that have the knowledge on just some of the details and the minutia associated with running a convention. Plus, this was a little different. They've always had to elect and approve delegates and electors, but with this endorsement process thrown in here, it really added to the complexity and the requirement to have a bunch of people there who are, counting, and of course you got observing and everything else to make sure it's all open and transparent. That process is not easy. It's very labor intensive, and you really need to be efficient and have a more thorough process. And what I would try to do in the future, if I was planning for the next convention, is I would say, listen, we're going to have 2,500 people here casting the ballots. What's the best process for us to collect these ballots? How are we going to do the voting? Same with, and although I think most of the congressional delegation breakout sessions worked fairly well, having a little bit more clarity on round-robin voting or how you're going to do that, and having those instructions laid out for those groups is going to make it a little bit easier. Having more people involved in the counting process. I was in the 3rd Congressional District breakout session. I was originally the appointed chair. Just means the first thing you do is you have a formal election to have somebody be appointed the permanent chair during that breakout session. And we were, looking at delegates and alternate delegates and all that stuff for the 3rd Congressional District. And ours was pretty simple because Joe Kent had already been endorsed before the party had had changed the rules, and so we were in a little bit of an anomaly probably compared to some of these other congressional district breakout sessions. But we still had to elect the delegates, the alternate delegates, and the district elector. And it ended up being, still took us a while. We had 4 people counting, and it could have gone, I still think it went fairly well, and it ended up being pretty easy. But man, if it had been really contentious, we would have needed more people involved in the handing them out, verifying the number of delegates there, keeping track of the delegates. There's a little bit more involved in that, and I think that people would, it would benefit people. These types of conventions moving forward, if there was a little bit more planning and thought process put into what that's like, and the practical side of it, and particularly when you have a lot of younger people involved, which the party does now, and there's this tendency to just think of, I'll just email you the files, right? Well, you're going to want some hard copies out there, right, of the platform. You're going to have to think about what the process is of sitting down and counting all of this. It isn't actually that hard, but it is more. It takes a little bit more work in the way of organizing, and so there's some stuff that I think that we'd have to look at. Let me see if I missed anything. Let's see. Oh, wait a second. Here's the first question. Sorry, guys. Oh, no, sorry. I bounced too far down. Let's see. Jason, you got a question here. If the Supreme Court strikes down the homeless laws, could Vancouver do more on homeless? They have completely taken over city parks. Sure, they could, and so could Spokane. The question is, will your local elected officials in these cities do anything? And your Vancouver crew in the city of Vancouver is not very good. The city of Spokane, especially with electing Lisa Brown, is just doing its best to torpedo that city as fast as they can. It's just a corruption crew on that city council. And I ended up walking over for dinner from the convention. And I've walked in Spokane for, on again, off again. I don't do it all the time, but when I'm there, have had plenty of times to walk in downtown Spokane on a weekend, like I just did. And it's currently it's horrible. It reminds me of walking in New York in the early 90s. So many drug addicts, so many people passed out, mental patients on the street. It really did not feel safe or look safe, or I don't think it was safe. Making that kind of a long walk. I certainly wouldn't ever want my family to experience that. So that is an issue. The Supreme Court striking down some of these laws, if they could open up the door from, I think, the artificial restrictions that have been placed on the handful of locally elected people who actually want to do the right thing, getting away those restrictions so that they can control this recruitment of drug addicts and flooding the zone with the drug addicts, I think that would really help a lot. And you'd see a big improvement in some of these cities. Have statewide Republicans had conventions in Western Washington? And the answer is yes, they have. The last two were in Vancouver and Tacoma. I was at the Tacoma one, but gosh, I want to say that was 2012, I think. But I went to that one. And the Vancouver one I don't remember going to. But anyway, they have on the west side. I think what they try to do is switch it back and forth. It is more expensive in the venue that can handle that size of people, it's going to be more expensive in Western Washington almost anywhere you go. And I think it's important to kind of remember that. I'm on the board of the Roanoke Conference, and we do our convention every year out at Ocean Shores. And that was originally chosen, 15 years ago, some period of time ago, because that was a relatively low-cost location, and we were trying to host a convention that was in a meeting like that wasn't too far away from the legislature, so that we could get legislators who could visit, even though session would be going when that convention was held. And it was also, cost-wise, pretty inexpensive compared to other locations. When you have to go out and, if you've never organized one of these, it is expensive, it is complex, and to do it well takes a lot of time. And the Roanoke Conference is only about 600 people. This conference is going to, it's 4 or 5 times that many people. So it's a little bit more complicated. Thunderstriker, evening. Here's my first question. How should governments address national security concerns without compromising civil liberties? Well, that's a great question. The challenge is always this balance between safety and freedom, right? Safety and liberty, and trying to pretend that one can't exist without the other. Government's always going to claim that what they're doing to you is for your own good and therefore public safety or for your safety. And so it's a very paternalistic approach, but it does, and even if some people involved are trying to do it for the right reasons, government isn't, in the long term, it's usually bad, right? Somebody's always going to take it over, and they're going to abuse people with the tools that they're given to supposedly fight against this, concern that they have. The Alien and Sedition Acts back in the day were a good example of the abuse of government laws in America, and really unconstitutional sort of approach to the First Amendment. If you look back in the early 1800s, they actually jailed people who ran newspapers at the time for publishing stuff the government didn't like. And I know that's been kind of forgotten in history, and there's this perception to look back and imagine that our First Amendment has just been protected up until Twitter and Google came along. But the reality is the government has periodically, during the Civil War, there was a lot of crackdown on free speech in America. During the especially during World War I, Wilson really cracked down and was very abusive, and really probably came the closest that we've ever been in this country, at least when it came to just throwing out your civil rights for a long time. I mean, there's a lot of hangover even to this day that came out of his actions 100 years ago. So the governments, how they address national security issues versus civil liberties that we have. And it's going to be a constant balance, but I would say that one place to start with, you don't do surveillance of your own citizens without a warrant, which unfortunately the Congress approved recently, and how you deal with the legal system that's tied into that is pretty important. Weaponizing the legal system in a way to attack people's freedom and liberties has really become a problem. So, Jason, what's your thoughts on Colorado passing all these gun bills? 5 years ago, this would have been unheard of. Did COVID change Colorado this much fast? No, Colorado was changed actually before then. It was just that the lefties that took over weren't really comfortable yet knowing what to do with their power. And making you and I less safe is a super high priority for them. They want to destroy your freedoms and liberty. Your freedom and liberty and your ability to think for yourself, the ability to defend yourself, of course, is a great threat to leftists who really are mostly about power and control. Power, money, and control drives the majority of the effort that you see with big government on out there. So with Colorado passing these bills, I mean, it was kind of similarly considered unheard of in Washington state as well, because this is a very long time history, more of a libertarian history than anything else, of being very good about protecting people's civil liberties and their Second Amendment. If you look at Article 1, Section 24, if I remember right, for our equivalent to the Second Amendment at the state level is much better than the federal level, I think, the language used. And yet, the process was, they've decided to go after that. I think there's a blowback coming. I don't know what that looks like yet, and I'm hoping that means that we'll replace a bunch of these people who are thinking this is a good idea. John Anthony, still trying to figure out how the injunction on the magazine ban was overturned in 88 minutes. Not that hard if you're the AG and you know you're going to lose. What you do is you prep the court, the Supreme Court, ahead of time. And as soon as you get that document, you basically, the AG's office is just a walk away from the Supreme Court. And so, and you got to remember, these guys know each other. So even though it was a court employee, what do they call him? A commissioner, court commissioner. And I've had to deal with them in the Supreme Court myself, right? So they're the people who actually come up to you. You don't just walk in to the bulletproof glass and then try to get the judge to come up and talk to you through the window. There's some process and some bureaucratic process that can go there. You go up to that window, you go up the steps in the courtroom. It's like straight through and to the left, I remember. You go in the hall and you can drop in your information for your appeal or whatever it is you're doing. And in this case, trying to get an emergency injunction to stop what the lower court just did is a fairly common process. And the the court commissioners are oftentimes empowered to do this. This is considered a very minor procedural sort of choice, as the actual decision goes up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court gets to decide, is this really what we want to do? So that's what's actually happening there. A number of people are retracting questions, I'm assuming here. So I'm assuming you're retracting them because I've already answered it. I hope that's the case, or maybe you're going to ask it in a little bit better way. But what plan do the reps have to watchdog the vote? Well, the question is not so much the reps. What plans do we have to watch the vote? I don't know why. You can't outsource your freedom and liberty to politicians or parties. You really can't. You use them as tools. They're both tools. Politicians and parties. They're the tools you use to hopefully maintain and restore the freedoms and liberties that you want to have in your community. I think it's always risky to presume that just because you've elected them, even because you like them, that they're just going to always do the right thing, or that they aren't going to have other influences on them that could get them to do something different, or that they're not just so busy that they could be distracted and make bad choices or decisions. That can happen. It's why you create groups of like-minded individuals who are actually serve as much better watchdogs on the representatives, because that's all they're doing is they're watching this kind of stuff. The representative is in there doing all kinds of other things, trying to get reelected, trying to raise money, trying to deal with 3,000 pieces of legislation that are going to land on his lap in the middle of the session. And very little that they do involves watching the vote. Election observers, of which you can become one. And I'd recommend anybody who wants to pay attention, you become an election observer where you live right now. That's not the only thing you need to do, but it's a simple process to get into initially. And I think it helps you get more familiar with the voting process wherever you live. All 39 counties have election observers. You can sign up ahead of time, get training. Maybe you could even be hired by the auditor's office to work there, which I would recommend, so that you get a chance to see what it looks like from the inside. I think it's an important thing. Let's see. Jennifer, yes, I appreciate that. Thank you for mentioning that. Not a question, but I'll put it up there anyway. Always like the video. Share it with others if you can. Listen, this is I do one live stream a week. This is it. I've thought about trying to set up to do more. I don't know that I'm providing so much value that you'd want to have more. Maybe you would. If you would, I'd consider that right now. But basically, the way I'm set up right now is I'll do one live stream a week. And so liking this video and sharing it's always helpful. It probably gets it out there a little bit further. And there's a lot of work that we're going to have to do because, as the previous person mentioned about the voting, a crush of lawsuits or voting in multiple states is creating a shadow for the 2024 election, and it is. There's lots of lawsuits over voting out there, and you got to remember that what happens is this is not super unusual, but the volume of change because of mail-in voting, especially launched during the 2020 election, unprecedented in our country. And even though mail-in voting has become illegal in most countries around the world, we've still decided in this country, for whatever reason, that somehow that's a good idea. And I don't think it is. And our state decided that, 15 years ago now. 2011 was the last county that still had in-person precincts. And it was Pierce that was the last county to do that. The conservative Republican counties in eastern Washington folded instantly and decided to go with all mail-in voting sooner even than Pierce County, which at the time wasn't even controlled by Republicans. And yet they were the last holdout, and they got eventually forced into that process. Mail-in voting's obviously produced all kinds of problems and lack of chain of custody, lack of accountability, and opens the door to all kinds of problems. And nobody tends to be watching or aware of that. Don't assume other people are, and be involved and engaged in it. I don't think the solution in the end is coming through the court system. Ultimately, the solution is going to be coming in with a lot of public exposure, a lot of work. It's a grinding process. I'm involved in this. Anybody that knows me on the Washington Voter Research Project, the voter roll cleanup efforts, and all these other efforts that are mostly thankless and happen outside of the big spotlight, that work's important, but it may not sound like you're changing the world or making a huge impact with it, but I think you grind away and you are over time. Next question. Alex, I saw that Byrd won the GOP endorsement. I'm new to the state's politics. What does that mean for him going forward? This is a good question because I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding out there as to what it means. Now, because it's never been done before, at least the state endorsing at the stage, what does a state have to offer, the state Republican Party have to offer a candidate? Well, there's a couple things that the party would have to offer. Number one, you can actually get more efficient and lower cost communications out there because of just the rules around mailings and other types of stuff that the party can actually more efficiently facilitate a lot of communication with probably your supporters in the state if you're willing to take advantage of that. Secondly, the party has the ability to use their own communications to promote any of the candidates that they got the endorsement. So, so that's something that they would take advantage of. And I'm assuming, I don't know if the Byrd campaign will or not, but they could. The other thing is that to some extent, that level of endorsement, oftentimes, if used correctly, can be used by the candidate to raise more money. And if they're able to raise more money, then they're able to actually use that money to go out and promote themselves. Money in politics is a function of marketing mostly. It's not a conspiracy. It's not a secret sauce, hidden agenda. It's just the facts. It's the reality. If you want to try to get your word out about yourself as a candidate or your campaign, it does cost some money to go and do that. This is as true in the election of 1800, right, as it is today. And I don't entirely know why this seems to come as a surprise or a mystery to people, but if you want to sell more product, you're going to have to probably have some kind of campaign to advertise. If you want to promote a candidate, you're going to have to find some way of reaching out to people and voters. And just a little hint here, it's not going to do you much good to only preach to the choir or just have a Facebook page somewhere talking about how awesome you are. You're going to have to find some way to reach those people that under no scenario are ever going to come to a state convention or a party convention or a political event of any kind. And it costs money. You're just going to have to pay for the marketing to go out and do that. The problem is because politics tends to be this kind of odd, dark art of some kind that seems to be a mystery to a lot of people. There's not a real clarity for people coming into this as to how a political campaign can do that in an efficient way for the most part. So they tend to hire experts, and those experts are considered either campaign managers or they're consultants or they're somebody, right? I'm putting parentheses, air quotes around this because there's a lot of terrible people and useless and incompetent and deceptive people that work in this world. Partially, it's because it's a weird world that if you were really that good or competent, you'd probably be working somewhere else, because your income as a consultant or political campaign manager is like an up and down. You feast and famine, right? You make a lot of money during a presidential race. The next year, you're not going to make a dime. And then the next year, maybe you get a congressional candidate. The next year, you're not going to make a dime. That's a difficult way to have a living and get paid somehow while you're starving in between campaigns. And so serious people oftentimes just don't get involved in that process. And what it means is that you're having a hard time basically trying to get out there and make an impact with the money that you have. So anyway, it's not an easy thing to do, but the benefit I think he's going to get is just to be able to say that he was endorsed, to use some of the resources that they already have and some of the funding opportunities that exist there. And there's not really a pot of gold that you get just because you get the party's endorsement. They don't have that much money. A lot of the money they do have is actually already allocated, because it's usually coming from the RNC back in D.C., and it's allocated, say, to some congressional amount or some other organization that comes in and gives them money. One of the other benefits you probably get, which, again, that would be up to the campaigns that got endorsed to see if they can take advantage of it, is if you have maxed out donors who have given to the campaigns, a lot of times if they give money to the party is able to filter some of that money back, not usually the same amount because earmarking in our state is illegal, but essentially it's the same. It's under campaign finance laws. But they can send some of that money that goes back into the campaign, and the limits, the campaign finance limits, are different for parties than they are for everybody else. And so the party has a little bit more flexibility on that. For some reason, the program that I have right now isn't showing me I'm not able to actually see some of the questions over here, but I am able to see them over there, so I'm not posting them up at the next set of questions here because for some reason it just doesn't seem to be working. And so I'm missing some questions right now, and I don't know why. Let me just see if maybe this will help clear it up and I can get to, oh yeah, there it is, sorry. Okay, let's keep going. Let's see, there's a whole bunch of them here. Obtaining, let's see. Do you think schools should let students out of class to participate in activism? No, I don't. That's a bad idea. Let them stay in school. You'll have plenty of time for the rest of your life to protest or be engaged in activists all you want. And frankly, you can do a lot of activism outside of school. You don't need to lose whatever time that you theoretically need in school. Let's see. Let's see. What are the chances of the new proposed initiatives obtaining the required amount of signatures? Again, it depends on when they start. There's a window of time. You can only collect so many signatures out there within that window of time. If you're doing an initiative to the people, you have to be done by July. I can't remember what the date is, but it's like mid-July, if I remember right. And that's a really tight time frame. That's if you want it on this November ballot. Now, you got a lot more time, and it's very doable if you go and do an initiative to the legislature for next year, but I think there's some incentive to try to get it on quickly. And again, if you don't start early enough, you don't get the title in time to, you have to work backwards from that. It's a lot easier if you have 3 or 4 months instead of 2 months to do it. It's not easy. Going to speak to the PDC tomorrow, and thoughts on their strategic planning process so far. I do, and I'm aware of that coming up. I didn't have it on my schedule to testify there. I may go anyway and talk to them. I would want to be a little more prepared than I think I'm going to be, but if I can get there in time to talk to them, I will. It depends on when the public comment is, but if I can get there and it's early enough, I can probably do it. And here's some thoughts that I have in the strategic planning process. One thing is staff has been highly motivated ever since, this is going back a number of years now, but ever since I started catching large volumes of Democrats, the PDC has dropped their average fine to a really low level. In fact, they really increased the number of warning letters they send out to everybody. I mean, it's not just Democrats, but because I caught so many Democrats, it wasn't as fun to fine everybody the same amounts they used to. So now they issue a lot fewer fines and smaller fines when they do issue them. So I just think they need to find like a good balance there. I'm not trying to destroy people's lives with $50,000 fines. I just think that if somebody keeps breaking the law, they need to eventually be fined. It's like a traffic ticket or something like that. It's not like it's the end of the world, a huge fine, but at least they get something, and I think that provides a little bit of incentive for them to be a little more open. Let's see. Can we set up ballot? This is a good question, by the way. Chaz, and thank you, Average Geek Joe. Hopefully I will see you there at the PDC. We'll see if I can make that work tomorrow. Can we set up ballot boxes to harvest ballots in churches for general election? The answer is yes, you can. Ballot harvesting in Washington State is fully legal. Every weird possible way you think of to do it. You cannot bribe people to actually vote a certain way. As much as the Lummi tribe got caught red-handed videotaping themselves committing that type of fraud. And of course, they'll never be held accountable for it, but it's still illegal. You're not supposed to do that. And if you did it, I guarantee they would hold you accountable. So you're totally allowed to do it. It's no problem. I think there are some good questions here today. Thank you, TZ. Let's see. Catherine Ladd, Lisa Brown cleaned up 2 homeless encampments last week. It's shocking to me that she ever does her job. So when she does something a little like that, I'm surprised. But looking at what I saw in Spokane, it is a nightmare going downhill fast. And she is so corrupt that I have low confidence in her ability to actually get started. But we'll see. Now, you got to remember this one that you just talked about here, the new one starting on the shoulder of Highway 90. Some of that has to do more with the Department of Transportation than it does with her. There's, yes, I know. I saw the same camp there in Burien as well. The Library City Hall, what a nightmare. And in Burien, you actually have some people that are actually trying to clean it up. So we'll see what happens. It did take 2 years to get rid of Camp Hope in Spokane. Part of this, too, is remember, you had the Jules Helping Hands, which is just a con artist game, and some of these other groups. They're using this as a money laundering sort of operation, right? They get the state or the city to give them cash, and then they make sure that they help support whichever politician's going to give them the best opportunity, to do more. So we'll just see what happens there. But Spokane looked terrible to me, worse than it's ever looked. So I hope they have seriousness at some point in time and clean it up. I know you won't get that with Lisa Brown, but at some point in time they're going to need it. Any chance that they will ever get rid of the Patriot Act? Sure there is, always, but you're going to have to elect the type of people that want to do that. And right now, I don't think you have a majority in D.C. that's willing to do that. Let's see. Jason, what are your thoughts on my Northwest article that Seattle police is dying? It seems like a good time to not be relying on the government. Yeah, it is. And I mean, part of the reason why they're doing this story, of course, is the fact that you've had such a collapse in law enforcement, the number of people in law enforcement in the city of Seattle, caused largely by, of course, terrible policies there. So, and so that's why they wrote that article, and it's mainly, it's going to take a while to restore the police department in Seattle to where it was before or better, and it's going to be a lot of work. Sean O'Donnell Pub is actually in Everett, the one I'm talking about. If you go to the one in Spokane, you're not going to be where I am on Thursday. So I'm talking about the Sean O'Donnell one off of I-5 in Everett. So thanks for asking that question. Is there a way to use initial process to make sanctuary cities in Washington illegal? Absolutely. You could definitely use it for that. What converse should Republicans in Idaho have in the next 10 years? Boise's rapidly turning blue. Politico says the Idaho Dems are going to be well-funded. Yes, they are. And the Republicans in Idaho are lazy and asleep at the switch mostly, totally unaware of the problems and challenges they face as they lazily sit back and say, we've been Republican forever. Why is that going to change? Because it's going to change because crazies are moving in and they get a lot of money and they're going to do things like fill all your PCO slots for Republicans that are actually leftists. That's what they're doing right now. And that's what happens. Idaho has a lot of work to do. Olympia is always trying to raise the yearly property tax cap. They failed recently in this last session. Have you heard about the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995? Did you watch the news at the time? And also, how did it impact the dialogue on extremism and radicalization in the United States? Yeah, I remember that actually quite well at the time. I was fairly young. I was in my 20s, and I was just starting to travel. I traveled a lot, and so it was part of my job at the time. And I worked for Allsop out of Bellingham, and I was just doing tons of travel. And after the Oklahoma City bombing, I remember I got randomly pulled out of line constantly, and extra screening at the airport for like a year and a half. And so that was something I remember. Also at the time, remember that was twisted into a story about how it was used as an excuse to kind of shut down some of the effort to downsize government at the time. There was a fairly strong effort in the early 90s. You saw it in Washington State in 94. You saw big changes across the country as they were rejecting Hillary Care. They were looking at how to downsize government, and of course that attack threw them off. I don't know how that's going to happen in the future because things keep changing. Did Will Ferguson ban natural gas and gas-powered engines? I doubt it because it's just too impractical to get there. Will he talk about like he's going to do it? Yes, I think he will, but will he? I doubt it, and there's a variety of reasons for that. Did we already go over HB 1589 about natural gas? We did talk about it. I signed up to volunteer to get signatures with Let's Go Washington. Wonder what else to do other than word of mouth. They can't hand out the sheets until the title's been approved, and that's not been approved yet. They're working on it, I think, but it's not been approved yet. What lessons were learned from the bombing in terms of preventing future acts of domestic terrorism? I don't know. I mean, there's a good question to that. The lone wolf narrative, is always going to exist out there as a boogeyman to justify government abuse and threats to your freedom and liberty. For sure, they'll always do that. I don't know if that's going to change anytime soon. But there's definitely there are some lessons to be learned, and one is the government's always going to use any tragedy as an excuse to take away your freedom and liberty, and we always have to be constantly aware that we have to push back on that. There's another. I only got a couple here, so let me just zip through these last ones because I know you keep throwing up questions, and I'm running out of time. How can the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact affect us in Washington? Well, we already have it. We signed on to it decades ago, long ago, and it doesn't change anything because it's essentially not legal in the sense that the Electoral College is still used as a way of selecting presidents, so it doesn't really affect anything right now. If it was taken away, it would probably be a good thing. Isn't there a lawsuit challenging campaigning in front of the courts right now? Yes, there is, and that's the one you heard me talking about earlier. And I think that one's I think it's an Oregon case. I think I'm right about that. Glenn, why don't you post more on X? Yeah, good question. I wish I did. I need to do more. I am aware of that. Okay, guys, with this, I think I'm going to close out today's live stream. Thank you guys so much for watching. Feel free to add comments down below. If you're watching us later, feel free to share with your friends. Encourage them to subscribe to We the Govern, the YouTube channel, as well as go to my website and subscribe there. If you like what I'm doing, please feel free. You can donate through my website at We the Govern. It's easy to do if you want, and it's always appreciated if you do. Otherwise, if I don't see you in Everett, or I don't see you in Pierce Thursday, and if I don't see you in Pierce County on Saturday, or if I don't see you at the PDC hearing possibly tomorrow, I imagine that I will see you soon somewhere else. I'm going to be all over the state, and I know that if you care about the future, you're going to show up and be involved as well. So I hope that you do so, because remember, the future always does belong, and only belongs to those who show up. Thank you guys so much. Have a good evening.